I spent 23 years building 450 mailers bridge analysis software. They fired me 72 hours before my 160K bonus, then realized the IP transfer hadn't happened yet. The lock had already made the decision before anyone said it out loud. One red light, one silent receptionist, and 23 years of work had been reduced to an access issue. That was how they chose to bury me. Wednesday, 7:48 a.m. The elevator opened onto the 14th floor, and before the doors finished sliding apart, something in my stomach tightened. My ceramic coffee mug was on Megan's reception counter. Not in my office, not beside the drafting notes I'd left open the night before, not near the stack of stamped reports waiting for final review. On Megan's desk. She saw me notice it. Then she looked straight back at her monitor and started typing with that useless, panicked rhythm people use when they're trying to look busy for someone else. No words, no purpose, just fingers tapping against plastic because silence would have been too honest. I swiped my badge. Nothing. I tried again. The reader gave me one hard red flash. No beep, no unlock, no mistake. Megan's shoulders lifted slightly like she was waiting for me to say her name. I didn't. After 23 years of walking past that same desk every morning, I knew exactly what it meant when she couldn't meet my eyes. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 54 years old, and that morning I learned I had been removed from Summit Crane Engineering by a man who had never built anything heavier than a quarterly strategy deck. His name was Trevor Crane, 31, founder's nephew. 5 months into the COO title his uncle had handed him after some glossy consulting stint in Seattle. He had the careful posture of someone who believed looking prepared was the same thing as being competent. His suit sat perfectly. His jaw looked expensive. His expression had been practiced in a mirror. He was waiting for me in conference room B. "Nathan," he said too gently, "come in. Have a seat." I stayed in the doorway. That room had seen real work. I had stood there at midnight arguing deflection limits with contractors who wanted shortcuts. I had fought over wind load assumptions, pier depths, material tolerances, drainage failures, and schedule threats while everyone in management talked about confidence from a safe distance. Now the table was empty except for one folder, and the room smelled like Trevor's cologne. Cold, sharp, artificial. He pushed the folder toward me with 2 fingers, as if distance made the act cleaner. I opened it. 1 page. Termination of employment. Effective immediately. Signed by Trevor Crane, Chief Operating Officer. "We're making changes to the senior engineering group," he said. "Your role has been eliminated. Your role. Not my work. Not my name. Not the systems I had written, defended, rebuilt, and dragged across the finish line while executives shook hands in rooms they didn't belong in. My role. I was Chief Structural Engineer. I created LoadPath, the proprietary structural analysis platform that had put Summit Crane ahead of every competing firm in Colorado for 15 years. Every major bridge, rail, and municipal infrastructure bid we'd won had leaned on that engine. Right then, LoadPath was supporting the $380 million Front Range Transit Corridor for the city of Denver, the biggest public works contract the region had seen in years. Trevor didn't know any of that in a way that mattered. He knew the talking points. He knew the revenue number. He knew how to say optimization without blinking. What he didn't know was that one signature had just put a $450 million acquisition in immediate danger. He also didn't know he had done it exactly 72 hours before my $160,000 completion bonus was supposed to hit payroll. 72 hours. That number sat in my head like a second heartbeat. 12 years earlier, Grant Crane had seen this coming. Grant was the man who built Summit Crane Engineering in 1987 with a used pickup, a transit level, and enough stubbornness to make bankers uncomfortable. After one brutal night saving a collapsing overpass redesign off I-25, he took me to Murphy's Tavern on Colfax Avenue. We were both running on coffee and bad food. My shirt still had graphite on the cuff. Grant looked older than usual, like the company had finally found a way to put weight on his bones. He ordered 2 beers, stared at his for a long moment, and said, "Nathan, one day the spreadsheet people are going to walk in here and decide the ones who made this place are liabilities." I remember not answering. He didn't need me to. He had watched it happen before. Good firms hollowed out after the founder stepped back. Legacy names kept on the door while the actual engineers were pushed out, squeezed down, replaced, or ignored until the work became unrecognizable. Grant leaned closer. "When that day comes," he said, "I don't want the work trapped in the hands of people who never understood it." So he built a trap of his own, quietly, legally, beautifully. A clause went into my employment agreement, buried behind compensation language and project bonus terms where nobody scanning for danger would bother to linger. If Summit Crane terminated me without cause before paying any active project completion bonus, all intellectual property rights connected to LoadPath would revert to me personally. Every patent, every license, every proprietary calculation module, every protected line of code, not retained by the company, not shared, not negotiable, mine. The clause was filed, notarized, and backed up in a safe deposit box at Rocky Mountain Trust on Blake Street. Grant had designed it like a pressure valve. If some future executive tried to save money by cutting me loose before paying what I was owed, the company would lose the asset that made the savings possible in the first place. Trevor Crane had just stepped directly onto it. I signed the termination form. No argument, no raised voice, no performance for the receptionist outside or the legal assistant pretending not to listen through the glass. Trevor's face softened with relief for half a second. That was the part I almost enjoyed. He thought my silence meant surrender. He thought because I took the pen, he controlled the room. I slid the folder back across the table and watched him accept it with both hands. Then I turned away. Before I left, I went to my office. The office door didn't open, and that was the second message. The first was the red light at reception. This one was personal. They had already changed the lock. I stood there for a moment with my hand still near the handle, listening to the empty hallway behind me, feeling the building behave like it no longer knew me. 23 years, and they had moved faster on my office door than they ever had on a permit revision. But I didn't need to get inside. That was the part Trevor didn't understand. Everything that mattered was backed up on encrypted servers that required my biometric authentication, not a password, not an admin override, not some IT ticket pushed through by a man in a suit who thought cloud migration was a strategy. My hand, my credentials, my architecture. I had designed that system myself when Summit Crane was still 40 people crammed into a converted warehouse in the Rhino district, with extension cords taped to the floor and plan sets stacked beside the coffee machine. I had built the company's digital infrastructure the same way I built bridges. Redundant, resilient, impossible to bypass unless you had the right load path. I walked down the corridor past the framed awards on the wall, regional excellence plaques, state infrastructure commendations, a national design citation for the Cherry Creek flood control rebuild, another for the South Platte pedestrian span. My name was on half of them. Not that it mattered now. They had left the plaques up. They had only removed the man. I crossed the lobby without looking back, pushed through the revolving door, and stepped into the Denver winter. The wind hit hard enough to make my eyes water. Cold here doesn't creep in. It arrives with intent. I sat in my truck in the garage off Spear Boulevard with the engine running and the heater blasting against my hands. For a minute, I did nothing. No calls, no texts, no angry email that some lawyer would frame later as instability. Then I opened my calendar. Friday, 5 p.m. That was when the completion bonus was scheduled to process. 72 hours from the moment Trevor smiled at me across that conference table and thought he had saved the company $160,000. If that payment didn't hit my account, and it wouldn't, because I was no longer an employee, LoadPath transferred to me automatically. And without LoadPath, Summit Crane had a beautiful office, a nervous receptionist, a reckless COO, and no engine. The Front Range Transit Corridor would stop cold. Denver's transportation office would trigger penalty clauses before anyone at Summit finished drafting their first excuse. Harrington National, the Dallas-based giant that had spent months circling the company with a $450 million acquisition offer, would walk away from a deal built almost entirely on the promise of LoadPath's capabilities. Trevor hadn't cut payroll. He had cut the support beam. I drove home on I-70 through traffic I knew too well, past concrete, steel, retaining walls, bridge approaches, and overpass columns I could read the way other men read family photos. I knew what sat under those roads. I knew the soil reports, the bearing pressures, the compromises, the late-night fixes no commuter would ever notice unless they failed. This city wasn't just where I worked. Parts of it had passed through my hands. Rachel was in the kitchen when I got home, packing lunches for the elementary school where she worked as the nurse. She looked up once, and whatever she saw on my face made her stop folding the sandwich bag. She didn't ask the kind of questions people ask when they're afraid of the answer. "Trevor?" she said. I nodded. She set the lunch on the counter and gave me the stillness she reserved for emergencies. Our son Tyler had already left for his shift. Electrical apprentice IBW Local 68, out the door before sunrise. The house was quiet except for the low murmur of the radio Rachel kept on for traffic and weather. How bad? Terminated. Effective immediately. No warning. No severance conversation. Just a folder and a rehearsed handshake. Her mouth tightened. I knew that little rich kid would break something. She didn't raise her voice. That made it worse. Rachel had met Trevor once at the company holiday party the previous December. She had watched him lean against the bar, telling stories about deals he had driven in Seattle to people who had spent their lives making sure actual structures didn't collapse. 10 minutes later, she leaned toward me and whispered, "That one thinks confidence is a credential." She had been right. She usually was. "The bonus," she said, "Friday, 5 o'clock. The corridor bonus, 160,000. She looked toward the hallway where Tyler's old graduation photo still hung slightly crooked because I never fixed it. That was supposed to help with the wedding. Tyler and Kelsey had been visiting venues for 3 weeks. Every conversation lately had included deposits, catering minimums, guest counts, and the quiet arithmetic parents do while pretending not to worry. I poured coffee from the pot Rachel had made before work, the roast we bought from the little shop on Tennyson Street. Through the kitchen window, I saw Mr. Whitaker next door clearing snow from his sidewalk in slow, stubborn lines. Normal morning. Normal street. Normal people moving through lives that hadn't detonated yet. "There's more," I said. Rachel turned back to me. "Remember Grant's retirement dinner?" I asked. "The part in his speech about protecting the work?" Her expression changed before I finished. Rachel had spent 20 years in public schools dealing with administrators, budget cuts, angry parents, injured kids, and impossible decisions made by people who never entered the room. She knew when a crisis had a second layer. I told her about the clause, not the short version, all of it, the trigger, the bonus, the termination without cause, the intellectual property transfer, the escrow documents, the patents, the licenses, the modules, the notarized copy sitting in a safe deposit box downtown. Rachel listened without interrupting. By the time I finished, the anger had left her face. Something colder replaced it. "So if they don't pay by Friday," she said, "LoadPath becomes yours. Automatically. And they can't keep running the corridor without it. No, the models are proprietary. You don't swap out structural analysis mid-project any more than you swap out a foundation after 10 stories are already standing. And the acquisition. Dead. Harrington is paying $450 million for the platform. Without LoadPath, they're buying desks, leases, and Trevor's cologne. Rachel leaned back slowly. "Nathan," she said, "do not be angry first." I looked at the microwave clock. 71 hours, 14 minutes. "Be smart first," she said. By the time the second day started, the cracks were already spreading. Not in concrete. Those you can measure. These were quieter and a lot more expensive. Wednesday, 2:15 p.m. My phone hadn't stopped vibrating all morning. Unknown numbers, 3 missed calls, 2 emails from reporters, Denver Business Journal and Rocky Mountain Ledger, both circling the same question without asking it directly, and 1 text from Luis Ortega. Luis was the best young structural engineer we had left. I'd mentored him for 6 years, ever since he came out of CU Boulder with a civil degree and something to prove. His parents ran a small restaurant in Aurora. He carried that mix of pressure and pride you only get when failure isn't an option. "Mr. Cole, Trevor's got outside consultants in the LoadPath server room. They can't get past the biometric locks. He's losing it." I called him immediately. "How bad?" "He's talking about rebuilding the system from scratch," Luis said. "Brought in some firm from San Jose. They're claiming they can replicate it in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I almost laughed, but it came out flat. LoadPath had taken 8 years to build. It wasn't just code. It was 15 years of proprietary soil data across multiple states, calibration layers tuned to regional wind patterns, seismic adaptations specific to front range conditions, and direct integration with municipal permitting systems I had written line by line during nights no one billed. "You can't replicate it in 2 months, I said, let alone 2 weeks. "That's what I told them," Luis said. "It's not just software. It's a full structural intelligence framework. The models are trained on datasets nobody else has." "Good. Listen carefully," I said. "Whatever happens over the next few days, you don't let this shake you. You've got a future in this field. Don't let anyone rewrite that." There was a pause. "Sir, should I be worried about the corridor job? There are over 300 people out there." I leaned back in the chair, staring at nothing. "I know what's at stake," I said quietly. "That's exactly why I need you to trust me." We hung up. The silence afterward felt heavier than the call. I went into my home office and pulled up the countdown on my laptop. 68 hours, 45 minutes. Then I opened a new email. Margaret Hale, longest serving board member at Summit Crane, former structural engineer before she moved upstairs. One of the few people left in in that company who understood what LoadPath actually was. Not the pitch version, the real thing. I kept it short. Margaret, I assume you're already hearing about access failures tied to the corridor project. As you know, my termination activates specific contractual provisions regarding intellectual property that directly affect current licensing structures. If the board intends to explore options before Friday's deadline, I'm available, not through Trevor. Nathan, I sent it and watched the cursor blink like it had somewhere else to be. Thursday, 6:30 a.m. I woke to gray light and the distant hum of traffic already building. Rachel was up, moving through her morning routine with the quiet precision she always had. The kind of rhythm that didn't change just because everything else did. My phone showed 7 missed calls. Margaret had replied at 1:52 a.m. emergency board session tonight. Preston informed. Trevor not yet. Stand by. I went downstairs and made coffee. Outside, Denver looked exactly like it always did in winter. Cold light, hard edges, a skyline that didn't care if you were having a bad week. The phone rang at 8 a.m. sharp. Unknown number, I answered. This is Nathan Cole. Mr. Cole, this is Commissioner Daniel Brooks with the Denver Department of Transportation. His voice carried that controlled tone people use when they already know the situation is bad and are trying to keep it from becoming worse. We've encountered a problem, he said. Our oversight team ran a standard verification on the Front Range corridor models yesterday. We received access denial across the entire LoadPath system. I need clarification. I'm no longer employed by Summit Crane as of yesterday morning, I said. Silence. Then, more carefully, Mr. Cole, the city currently has a $380 million infrastructure contract that depends on continuous access to certified structural analysis systems. If those systems are unavailable, we're looking at immediate compliance issues. You'll need to contact Summit Crane's current leadership, I said. We have, he replied. There was a pause. They are unable to provide the required certifications at this time. Of course they were. That's unfortunate, I said. Mr. Cole, he continued, voice tightening just slightly. I'm going to be direct. If we cannot verify structural integrity models within 48 hours, I am legally required to suspend construction and initiate an independent safety review. I didn't say anything. That means over 300 workers off-site, he went on, a minimum 6-month delay, and approximately $40 million in penalties. The number landed exactly where it was supposed to, not as a threat, as a measurement. And for the first time since Wednesday morning, I could feel the pressure shifting, just a fraction, away from me. He didn't say it outright, but he didn't need to. The city wasn't just asking questions anymore. They were already deciding who they'd rather deal with. I understand, I said carefully. You might want to contact the board directly. Margaret Hale. She's the only one left there who actually understands the system. A pause on the line. He heard what I meant. When the call ended, the kitchen felt too quiet. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the table, thinking about the 300 workers on that site. Steel crews, concrete finishers, crane operators, men and women who showed up before sunrise in January, cold to build something that would outlast all of us. They didn't deserve to lose paychecks because Trevor Crane wanted to shave $160,000 off a balance sheet. Rachel, I started, then stopped. She looked at me. Am I doing the right thing? She didn't answer immediately. She walked over, still in her scrubs, cartoon bandages printed across the fabric, and sat down across from me. You're asking because of them, she said. The workers. I nodded. If that site shuts down, you didn't shut it down, she said. Trevor did. The second he fired the only person who could keep that system running. I could fix it right now. I said, one call, restore access. Everything keeps moving. You could, she agreed. And then what? I didn't answer. He learns nothing, she continued. The next senior engineer he decides is too expensive gets treated the same way. And that clause Grant built, the one he spent 12 years making sure would actually work, it becomes meaningless. She was right. That didn't make the next 44 hours any easier. Thursday, 11 a.m., Denver Business Journal ran a story about personnel disruptions at Summit Crane affecting the Front Range corridor. By noon, national engineering outlets picked it up. By 2 p.m., Harrington National stock was down 3% on rumors their flagship acquisition was unstable. Pressure doesn't announce itself, it accumulates. My phone rang. Preston Crane, CEO, Trevor's uncle, the man who had kept the company steady for years until he chose blood over judgment. Nathan, he said. His voice sounded rough, like he hadn't slept. I owe you an apology. You do? A breath on the other end. Trevor acted without board approval, he said. I didn't know about your termination until Margaret called me last night. I've been in meetings since midnight trying to understand what he's done. And? Another pause. It's worse than I thought. Harrington is asking questions we can't answer. The city is threatening suspension. Our insurer wants confirmation we still hold valid licensing for our core platform. He stopped. Nathan, the clause. So he'd seen it. Margaret showed me the filing. He continued. I had no idea. Grant didn't want you to, I said. He wanted it to work when it mattered, not get negotiated away when it was convenient. Silence. Heavy this time. What do you want? Preston asked. I looked at the countdown on my laptop. 30 hours, 58 minutes. I want a conversation, I said, after Friday at 5. Nathan, if we wait that long, then you better hope Trevor's consultants are as good as he thinks they are. I ended the call before he could respond. Thursday, 4 p.m. Margaret called. The board met again this afternoon, she said without preamble. Trevor's been removed, effective immediately. Preston abstained. The rest voted unanimously. That didn't surprise me. That's a start, I said. It is, she replied, but it's not enough. Of course it wasn't. We want to propose a consulting agreement, she continued. Immediate restoration of your system access. $3,000 a day through project completion, plus your original bonus. I didn't respond right away. Margaret, I said finally, by tomorrow at 5, I own LoadPath. I know, she said. That's exactly why I'm calling. She let that sit for a second. Think about what Grant wanted, she added. He built that company to build things that matter. If LoadPath leaves, the corridor collapses. 300 people lose work, and every other active project depending on it follows. She aimed that carefully, and it landed. I'll think about it, I said. But if there's a meeting Friday, I want to be there. You will be, and I want Luis Ortega in the room. A pause. The junior engineer. He's not junior, I said. He's the future, and he deserves to see how decisions like this get made. Another pause. All right, she said. Thursday, 9 p.m. Rachel and I sat on the couch after dinner, watching snow fall in slow, steady lines past the window. Tyler had stopped by earlier with Kelsey. We'd eaten pasta, argued about football, talked about venues, budgets, seating charts, normal conversations layered over something none of them fully saw yet. For a couple of hours, it almost felt like nothing had changed. Almost. Rachel leaned her head back, eyes on the ceiling. You already know what you're going to do, she said. I didn't answer, because the truth was, I was still deciding which version of the ending I could live with. The offer came in while snow was still falling. One email, $12 million, and suddenly loyalty had a price tag with commas in it. That was the first time I understood how clean temptation could look. It was the kind of evening I had missed too many times over 23 years. Late night emergencies, weekend calls, one last review, one quick certification. Always the work first until life learned to keep moving without asking whether I'd be there. Then my phone buzzed. An email from Thomas Keene, CEO of Harrington National. Mr. Cole, Harrington is prepared to discuss a direct licensing arrangement for LoadPath independent of Summit Crane's corporate structure. Proposed terms, $12 million over 3 years, including consulting and transition support. Please call at your convenience. I handed the phone to Rachel. She read it once, then again. That's retired tomorrow money, she said quietly. I know. She looked at me over the screen. What does your gut say? My gut says Grant didn't write that clause so I could cash out. He wrote it so the work wouldn't end up controlled by people who didn't respect it. And your head. My head says we should probably hear the offer before I make a $12 million decision based on loyalty to a dead man's wishes. Rachel's mouth curved just slightly. That, she said, is the smartest thing you've said all week. Friday, 8 a.m. I walked into Summit Crane's lobby wearing a visitor badge. That part almost made me laugh. 23 years helping build the firm's name, and now a sticker on my jacket decided whether I belonged upstairs. Megan looked up from reception. This time, she didn't look away. Welcome back, Mr. Cole, she said. The words were small, but they meant something. Conference room B was full. Margaret Hale sat at the head of the table. Preston Crane looked like he had aged 10 years in 3 days. 2 other board members sat stiffly beside him. Harrington had sent its vice president of acquisitions from Dallas. And in the corner, wearing a sport coat I'd never seen before, was Luis Ortega, nervous, alert, watching everything. Margaret began without ceremony. Nathan, thank you for coming. I believe everyone here understands the stakes, but I'm going to state them clearly. She folded her hands. At 5 p.m. today, if Nathan's completion bonus has not been paid, full intellectual property property ownership of LoadPath transfers to him under a clause written by Grant Crane 12 years ago. Without LoadPath, the Front Range Corridor contract is exposed, the Harrington acquisition is effectively dead, and Summit Crane's future becomes uncertain. No one moved. Preston spoke next. Nathan, before anything else, I need to address Trevor. His voice was low. He made a decision that was arrogant, short-sighted, and disrespectful to everything you've given this company. I brought him in because he was family. I thought I could teach him the business. He swallowed. I was wrong. I nodded once. I didn't pile on. Trevor was 31. I had made bad decisions at 31 too. The difference was mine hadn't put hundreds of paychecks and a $380 million public project at risk. I looked at the wall clock. 9:07 a.m., 7 hours and 53 minutes. Here's what I want, I said. I'd spent the drive downtown sorting every scenario like a structural model, checking each option for hidden stress points. First, Luis Ortega is promoted to Director of Structural Engineering, full authority over LoadPath development, direct report to the board, not to the next COO, not to any executive who can't tell a bearing wall from a press release. Luis froze. Margaret turned toward him. Preston did too. I've trained him for 6 years, I continued. He knows this platform better than anyone except me. In 2 years, he'll know it better than I do. Luis looked at me. I gave him the smallest nod. Margaret answered first. Done. Second, I said, Summit Crane establishes a technical succession protocol. No critical system in this company ever depends on one person again. Documentation, cross-training, redundancy. You build protection into your people the same way we build it into bridge supports. Preston nodded slowly. That's fair, he said, and overdue. Third, my completion bonus is paid today, all $160,000 as scheduled. Of course, Margaret said. Fourth, I'll consult through completion of the corridor and the Harrington transition. 6 months, part-time, $200 an hour. After that, I'm done. Preston looked up. Done. No emergency calls, no weekend reviews, no just one more project. I mean, done. The room absorbed that. Then Preston asked the only question that mattered. And LoadPath? I looked at the clock again. 9:14 a.m. I still had until 5. LoadPath stays with Summit Crane, I said. The Harrington VP leaned forward just slightly. I'll execute a licensing agreement preserving full company rights for current and future projects. But I'm adding one condition. Margaret's eyes narrowed with interest. Call it Grant's Clause Part 2. If Summit Crane terminates any senior technical employee without cause within 12 months of a major contract deadline, that employee receives automatic co-ownership rights to any critical system they materially helped build. The boardroom went completely still. I let the silence do its work. You want to fire people? I said. Fine. But from now on, it costs you what they actually built. Fine, I said, but from now on, nobody gets to save money by destroying the people who built the thing they're selling. No one reached for their coffee, no one shifted papers. For once, the room understood the weight in the walls. The Harrington VP was writing quickly, his pen moving like he was trying to keep up with the damage and the repair at the same time. Preston stared at the table. Margaret, I noticed, was fighting the smallest smile. Preston finally looked up. That's one hell of a condition, Nathan. It's the condition Grant would have written if he'd known they'd need it twice, I said. I'm just finishing the job. Another silence, then Margaret folded her hands. All in favor? 4 hands went up immediately. Preston hesitated, not long, then he raised his too. Unanimous, Margaret said. At 10:00 a.m., my phone buzzed. Not the bonus. That would come later. It was a text from a number I hadn't seen in 2 years. Grant Crane, apparently still alive and causing trouble from whatever golf course in Scottsdale had been unfortunate enough to accept him. Margaret told me everything. Proud of you, Nate. Knew that clause would earn its keep someday. Don't let them forget what matters. I stared at it longer than I expected, then typed back, never did, never will. At exactly 5 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Bank notification, $160,000 deposited. The original clause stayed asleep. LoadPath stayed with Summit Crane, but not the same way it had before. Now it carried protection for the next engineer they thought was too expensive. And the one after that. Luis found me in the lobby while I was peeling off my visitor badge. Mr. Cole, he said, voice low. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he swallowed. Just do the work, I told him. Take care of the people doing it with you, and read every contract they put in front of you, especially the parts they hope you skip. He laughed once, but it didn't last. Thank you, he said. My parents, this is going to change everything for them. I shook his hand. That mattered more than the bonus. Friday, 7:30 p.m. Rachel and I sat at our kitchen table with green chili burgers from a place on Federal Boulevard and 2 bottles of local beer sweating onto paper napkins. The house was warm. Tyler had called earlier to say he and Kelsey had put a deposit on a venue near the river, an old brick warehouse with high windows and string lights already hanging from the rafters. Rachel cried after they hung up and pretended she hadn't. "So," she said, picking up her burger, "how does it feel?" I thought about lying, then I didn't. "Lighter," I said, like I took off a backpack I forgot I was wearing. She nodded slowly. "The good kind of lighter?" "The best kind. The kind where you realize you were carrying someone else's weight for so long you forgot what your own shoulders felt like." Rachel reached across the table and squeezed my hand. The radio was low in the background, traffic and weather blending into the quiet sounds of home. Through the window I could see the neighborhood. Small houses, porch lights, driveways edged with snow, families doing what families do, surviving the cold, paying bills, showing up, building lives with stubbornness and whatever grace they could afford. "What are you going to do with all this free time?" she asked. "First, I'm going to Tyler and Kelsey's wedding without checking my email once." Rachel smiled. "Then I'm fixing that back porch step that's been creaking for 3 years." Ambitious. "Then maybe we go somewhere warm for a week, somewhere nobody asks me about load calculations." She looked at me like she had been waiting years for that sentence. "I have wanted to hear that for 23 years, she said. My phone buzzed one last time. "Luis, first thing Monday, I'm reading every contract in the building, top to bottom, even the fine print." I set the phone face down. He didn't need an answer. He already knew what to do. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was clearing the way it sometimes does after a hard storm, when the clouds finally break and leave behind a cold so clean it almost feels new. A few stars showed through over the rooftops. Not many, just the stubborn ones. Some things I realized are worth more than acquisitions, titles, corner offices, and decades spent proving yourself to people who only notice when removing you becomes expensive. Some things are worth fighting for, but only if you know when the fight is over. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, there was no countdown running in my head.